Wow. A Hoosier in the house. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Thank you to Kimberly and Charles for your leadership in the community, as well as your support and for demonstrating what entrepreneurship can do to lift up people of color and to be part of history, this Black History Month, extending possibilities for the future here in Las Vegas and across the state of Nevada. Thank you. And thanks. Yeah, that deserves a plan. Applause. And thanks to everybody for taking time to join us today as the Nevada caucuses are bearing down on us. The last day for early voting in just a few days until Saturday, when I believe Nevada is going to make history. And so if you're a supporter of our campaign, I'm here to urge you to use every minute that you're willing to share with us to reach out and to spread that message to those we can convince to use that power of the vote in the caucuses. And if you're still making up your mind, which I know is a lot of people here in the Las Vegas area and across the state, then I'm here to look you in the eye and ask you for your vote. And to share with you why it is I hope to earn it. Because I know that we're not entitled to any votes that we haven't gone out and earned. I'm here to talk about where I think our country is headed, what it's going to take to make our country a better place before it's too late, and how we can do it together through a better kind of politics. And I'll try to be concise so that we can have a conversation too. Let me begin by asking you to form in your own mind the image that guides my campaign. It's an image I think about all the time, and I want you to try to visualize it. It's what it's going to be like the first time that the sun comes up over Nevada and Donald Trump is no longer the president of the United States. Feel good? Are we ready for that day to come about? Just to put the chaos behind us. It'll be a good day, right? Put the tweets behind us. Won't that be nice? I don't even think that's a partisan statement anymore. Because not only are my fellow diehard Democrats determined to bring that day about, but I'm meeting a lot of independents who feel the exact same way. We're even seeing a lot of what I like to call future former Republicans. And if you feel like your party has left you, you are welcome to join us in this effort. Just because we don't agree 100% of the time doesn't change the fact that we have got to come together to deliver a better White House and a better future. And that's what this campaign is about. Now, in order to do that, we've got to make sure we put the best possible nominee forward. Because this is our only shot. This is our only chance to defeat this president. It came before the Senate. The Senate, under Mitch McConnell's leadership, did what the Senate was going to do. But I know that it can feel depressing and exhausting to watch how that process played out. I know that it can even create a temptation to turn it off and walk away. But the beauty of being empowered as a voter in 2020 is that the Senate might have been the jury then. But the verdict is up to us now. We get the last word on this president and on the senators who protected him. This is our chance. So we better be ready to compete. Now, in order to compete, don't you think a president like this who talks about supporting working people, but only ever seems to keep his promises to corporations, paying now sometimes $0 in taxes on billions of dollars in profits, maybe ought to have to stand next to somebody who actually lives in a middle-class neighborhood in the industrial Midwest and guided a city in the so-called Rust Belt back from the brink by putting workers first. Don't you think it would be a good idea for a president who likes to cloak his wrongdoing in religion? I mean, this president, right? To be called to account by somebody who is not afraid to call out to fellow believers and remind America that God does not belong to a political party in the United States. A person of faith who also understands that under this Constitution, our country belongs to people of every religion and of no religion equally, because that's in our Constitution. And don't you think a president who is given to beating his chest and talking tough, throwing himself a military parade, even though he avoided serving when it was his turn, ought to be held to account by somebody who actually wore the uniform of this country and is prepared to remind him why it's not patriotic to pardon a war criminal. Let's have that debate. I'm looking forward to that debate. That's how we're going to defeat Donald Trump. But I've got even better news, because the real reason I asked you to picture that day is not just a reminder of the goal we've got to bring about politically. It's the challenge that the next president is going to face, because on that day, our country is going to be faced with issues we barely thought of a few years ago. Global health security challenges, pandemics. We've got cybersecurity threats and election security problems, and an economy here being reshaped by technology and gig work. All of these things will be waiting on day one on the desk of the next president, and they're going to require a view to the future and a readiness to bring together and heal a frighteningly divided and polarized American people. And in order to do that, we have to activate a growing American majority that doesn't just agree on who we're against, that we need a better president, but strikingly can begin to agree on what it is we're for. Right now, there is a powerful American majority that is for ensuring that we lift wages, empower workers, and finally become an economy where one job is enough, whether you've got a college degree or not. We've got a powerful American majority ready to support a healthcare reform the likes of which we haven't seen in a half century, creating Medicare for anybody who wants it, just so long as we trust you to decide whether you want it. That's how we make sure there's no such thing as an uninsured American. We've got a powerful majority right now committed to taking the steps we have to make sure this becomes a country where your race has no bearing on your health or your life expectancy or your wealth or your experiences with law enforcement. We've got to act now to make that a reality. A strong American majority that is committed already to the importance of supporting our troops, not just with a bumper sticker that says so, but by seeing to it that we put an end to endless war and never ask them to serve in conflicts that could have been avoided by a wiser commander-in-chief. Right now, the American people are ready to support our next generation and those who educate them with a president and a Secretary of Education who actually believe in public education and support our educators and our teachers. We are ready to do these things. So you see, we're ready to come together around the steps that we need, bold policies that could actually be unifying, not divisive. And also, I think Americans are ready for just a different style in the White House. Wouldn't it be nice to have a president you could look at on the news and actually feel your blood pressure go down a little bit instead of up through the roof? I think this is our chance. And we're running out of time. This can't wait 10 years. This can't wait 4 years. And I'm reminded of that in my travels on this campaign, not just by the voters I talk to who let me know what's at stake for them, but by Americans I'm meeting not yet old enough to vote, who remind me what's at stake. An 11-year-old come to an event, stick up his hand and ask a question about prescription drug availability. Not because he's an emerging healthcare policy buff, although he seemed like a pretty smart kid, but because he's worried about whether his family will continue to be able to afford the insulin that he depends on in order to live. He can't wait for all of us who are old enough to vote to accept the responsibility of seeing to it that there is no such thing as an unaffordable prescription in the United States of America. That's life or death for his family. I meet a 13-year-old who let me know that she asked for Christmas for a bulletproof backpack because she's that worried about going to school. She can't wait for us to take the steps now to demonstrate that we get that the Second Amendment can't be twisted into an excuse to do nothing whatsoever when it comes to saving lives from gun violence in this country. We've got to act. And when I see a 10-year-old come to one of my events and let me know he'd been elected the mayor of his school. That's a job they have at his school. And then he pointed out, kind of diplomatically pointed out, that he was planning to be here in the year 2100. And that when he is, he's going to be looking back on the decision we make right now in 2020 and whether we create a climate that he and his future kids and grandkids can thrive in. He can't wait for us to act, to do something about climate change and lead the world in doing something about climate change, restoring our credibility as a country in the process. We've got to do that right now. This is our chance. It's our only chance. And yes, these things are a tall order. This is going to be a tough set of things for the next president to achieve. But that's, I believe, what the White House is all about. I think it's what the presidency is for. I'm asking for your support for this office, not because I decided one day that I feel like occupying it, but because I believe it has a purpose. That the purpose of the presidency is not the glorification of the president, it is the unification and the empowerment of the American people to achieve these big things together. That's why I'm asking for your vote. All right, so I promised this wouldn't just be a monologue. We've got some campaign team members who have microphones, I think. They will come to you. They'll hold the mic and everything, and I'll try to be concise so we can take up as many questions as possible. Yes, sir. You up first. Go ahead.
I was wondering if, I think if the socialist Bernie Sanders wins the nomination, Trump will beat him. What do you think?
I share that concern. I mean, look, Senator Sanders, I think, speaks to a lot of ideals that we all share. But right now, we've got to make sure we're drawing as many people as we can into our coalition. And if the message goes out that your only choices are either got to be for a revolution or you must be for the status quo, I don't think most of us see ourselves in that picture. Most of us are looking for something else. And a politics that says, if you don't agree with me 100% of the time, you don't even belong. That's clubbing people over the head, telling them you got to be just all the way over to the edge like us. That's not how, not just in order to win, but in order to govern a dangerously divided country, we've got to do it in a different way. And that's part of what's at stake. Look, we're coming up on a lot of delegates being decided, first in Nevada, then South Carolina, and then on the following Tuesday. And if we get to a place where that's all we've got to offer as a party, or we're asking people to choose between a revolution and a billionaire who thinks that you can just buy your way onto television and win that way, I just don't think that's speaking to where most of us are right now. And this is an opportunity to build a different kind of politics that's about belonging. It's about adding to our coalition. It's not defined by who we can drive away. Yes. Go ahead.
I was contacted by the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago during Chinese New Year, and the question she asked me was, did any of the candidates that came to Nevada reach out to the Asian community? And sometimes I am the only Asian in the whole room. And I thought to myself, well, you know what? That is what I would like to see, is someone who reached out to the minorities. Yeah. And I want to know, what will your cabinet look like when you're president?
Oh, great question. Yeah. It's a great question. And, you know, one of the very first events we did here in Nevada when I was first trying to get known was with the APIA community. And we had a wonderful gathering. And I saw, first of all, how diverse the Asian American and Pacific Islander community is, with different stories and different experiences, but I think also a common determination to make sure America is better for a future generation. And that's true in terms of how my own community has been enriched by the contributions of Asian Americans. And my own campaign, where everybody from our national investment director to our policy director comes from the Asian community. And so I value that as part of how we're going to have a good cabinet too. Look, in order to run a country as diverse as the one that we live in, we've got to make sure diverse perspectives are at the table. And whether it's appointees to positions on the bench, judges, or whether it's the cabinet, one of the first things I'm looking for is to make sure that we have a makeup that reflects this country. Not only because it's the right thing to do, because it's good and fair, but also because we're going to make better decisions. That's why it's so important to make sure that Black and Latino and API voices are at the table, that we have a balance in terms of identity and gender. I am committing that our cabinet will be at least 50% women, because our country is, and we're going to make better decisions that way. So that's the kind of leadership you can expect from my team. Thank you.
Thank you. My husband wants to know, you shook his hand in Elko yesterday.
Oh, good.
How you can preserve Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and such important programs, while at the same time trying to bring down this horrible deficit that we are accumulating irresponsibly, in my opinion.
Right. It's a great question because, again, my friend Senator Sanders doesn't seem to think it matters how much things cost. There's a gap of $25 trillion in his plan, which is bigger than the whole U.S. economy. And I think as a candidate, I've got a responsibility to explain to you how it's going to add up. Now, here's the good news. We can fully fund all of the big ideas and promises and investments that my campaign is putting forward if we're willing to raise revenue, not through middle-class taxes, but by things like rolling back the Trump corporate tax rate cut that wasn't needed in the first place and is only benefiting a handful of people. When it comes to Social Security, look, if we just make one move, which is to collect payroll tax on income over $250,000, we just take that one step, and the trust fund is secure into the 2050s when I expect to be drawing Social Security checks. It's the same thing with funding Medicare and Medicaid. We got to be willing to raise the revenue, and we got to look at common sense measures that'll keep the cost under control, not by cutting benefits, but for example, on Medicare, the common sense step of finally allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices with prescription drug companies. Most of us already think we ought to do that. And that's why when an outside group scored the top 4 candidates and they did the math on all our policies, all the costs and all the revenue, mine was the only one that added up to where over time it would actually begin to reduce the deficit if you looked at all the things we're putting forward. So I do think that it's important. The president has put $1 trillion, this is one of the reasons I think some Republicans are starting to walk away from this White House, $1 trillion deficit with no explanation of what we're supposed to do about that. The time has come for us to be honest in campaigning and to explain where the revenue is going to come from. Say again? Exactly. Right. They call it an entitlement, but I was at one campaign event, a guy stood up and he said, I don't think of Social Security as an entitlement. I think of it as a paid endowment because I paid into it. I don't know if that's going to catch on as a term, but it's a better way to think about it because this is something we paid for. We contributed every day of our working lives. Exactly. And that would be breaking a promise. It's not about doing anybody a favor. It's about keeping a promise. Yes.
Hi, Pete. I'm Shauna. I've seen you already twice this week.
Oh, gosh. Thanks for coming.
My daughter, Sophia, is the one in the yellow dress. She said to tell you hello.
Oh, tell her hi.
As a veteran, I want to thank you for your service, but
Thank you.
my husband and I are career veterans. I wanted to know, especially with talks of the cuts being made to assistance programs that do affect our junior enlisted primarily, what is your plan to bridge the poverty gap between the younger airmen and a living that they can live on while they're serving our country?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for serving, and thanks to everybody here who wore the uniform of this country. And you're right, that especially, in fact, somebody came to a veterans town hall we did yesterday and pointed out that, if you're an E3 or below, you're not even at a basic living wage. And we're talking about folks who are putting their lives on the line for this country. And that's why we not only need to look at enlisted pay and make sure that we're doing that right, but as you mentioned, we have all these other ways of supporting our troops that compensate for that. But they're on the chopping block now. Everything from the way they're diverting funds to try to pay for this wall. I'll tell you this. In terms of the track record of keeping this country safe, I'll take an enlisted airman over a wall anytime. So we've got to support not just those who serve, but their families, their spouses who put so much on the line, their children. We've got substandard housing on base. We've got contractors ripping people off. There's got to be accountability there. And we've got to make sure that when, for example, a spouse interrupts their career to go along with somebody that they love, we do things like, sounds like you've been there. Then we got to do things like the same kind of suspension of student debt repayment that we would have for an active service member. We have got to act to show, not just tell, what it means to support our troops. And it goes beyond just saying thank you for your service. Appreciate it. In the back. Yes. Well, first of all, one thing about being gay and being from Indiana is you're not too worried about bullies. You got a lot of batting practice there. Look, we're living in a moment now where there are so many different patterns of exclusion, telling different people in different ways for different reasons they don't belong in this country. And that's certainly something that the LGBTQ community has felt a lot. And yet we're also at a moment when I think our country is prepared to show a better face. And one of the best things about this campaign has been being able to meet, especially young people who don't always know if their family or their community has a place for them or their country. And being able to insist just by the fact that I'm standing here that, yes, you do. And if folks want to talk about family values, I'm proud of my family. I'm proud of my marriage. I married a teacher. I am proud of him every day of the week. And look, there's going to be have to be an evolution of attitudes. But let me tell you my experience. When I came out, it was a re-election year. I just reached that point in my life. I wanted to get on and have a personal life, and that meant coming out. We didn't know what the politics of it would be. But and Mike Pence was the governor of Indiana at the time. Indiana was not an easy place to try to do this, right? But I thought, you know what? We just have to trust that the voters are going to judge me based on the job I'm doing for them. I wound up getting 80% of the vote. If that can happen in Mike Pence's Indiana, then I think we can send a message across the country that we're ready to move on. Thanks for the question. All right. Make sure we got this side. Yes?
Can you tell me more about the Douglas Plan?
Yes. Thanks for asking. So the Frederick Douglass Plan is the reason I thought it was important to name the plan after an important historical figure like Frederick Douglass, who called on America to actually live up to its creed. I also want to remind us of things like the Marshall Plan, where America invested a huge amount of money in post-war Europe to rebuild Europe. We got to start making some investments right here at home. And the Douglass Plan is about lifting up an agenda for Black Americans across every area of life, where this has become two different countries based on the color of your skin. And it didn't just stop with the civil rights movement. In fact, some things like home ownership have gotten worse than at the beginning of the Fair Housing Act. So it's about economic empowerment, making sure that we in the federal government are supporting Black-owned businesses that have such a good track record of creating opportunities for others. But of course, not everybody's going to go start a business, so it's also about making sure that we lift up the wages of working people in fields where workers are disproportionately likely to be Black or other workers of color. It's about health, knowing that right now Black patients are less likely to be believed when they go into an ER and describe being in pain, which is one of the reasons why we have this shocking fact that women are 3 times likely to die from complications of childbirth if they are Black. It's why we need to have a reinvigorated Office of Health Equity and Justice, and it's why we need to be recruiting more clinicians, nurses, doctors, nurse practitioners who have the lived experience of being treated differently over race and can bring that to the job. It's why we got to have justice in housing. I'm proposing a 21st century Homestead Act. And unlike the original Homestead Act that was at the expense of Native Americans, this one would be about finding those areas where families have been redlined into certain neighborhoods, only to face being gentrified right back out of them when the prices start to go up, and instead invest in their home ownership, because that's how wealth is built for so many families in America. It's about reforming the criminal legal system that has treated people differently throughout American history and continues to this day. Decarcerating a country that is way over-incarcerated and ensuring more diversity of experience as well as racial background on the bench. My point is all of these different pieces are connected. Education, supporting HBCUs, and behind all of it, the need for a 21st century Voting Rights Act so that racial voter suppression cannot continue going forward. Now, I want to say that as a mayor, I could point to a lot of things that we got right. Black unemployment and poverty fell in my city. We were nationally recognized for some of our work, but I was also humbled repeatedly by the difficulty of being able to make progress in a lot of areas, including related to policing and justice. And it's why I know that we need to engage the powers of the presidency, as well as the entire country, in order to make these kinds of changes. I'm not pretending it'll be easy, and I'm not pretending to have all the answers. But the Douglas Plan is the result of listening, learning, showing up, and including diverse voices in the way we create policy in my campaign. And my hope is that's a way to show, not just tell, what kind of presidency I'm proposing to build. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I've supported you since early in your campaign. And lately I've had a couple concerns. You talked a lot about policy, and I think you've made a lot of assumptions. A couple weeks ago, Bill Maher posed a question to you, which you seem to brush off, and I think it's far more important than any policy issue that we're discussing today. What happens when he refuses to concede, and you've won the election? Have you been in discussion with military officials? I mean, you have a lot of supporters here. These are nice people. Bernie has an army. What's the plan?
Yeah. Well, look, the reality is, if this president calls the legitimacy of the election into question because he lost, it's going to be a tough moment for this country. There is no easy fix. Nobody can stand here and say a sentence about how we're going to fix that as a country. But I'll tell you my approach. First of all, the simple fact that under this Constitution, there's only one president. And the fact that elections are run by the people, and that there will be a paper trail on our elections. But it's more than that. This is part of what I'm getting at when I say that we need to draw everybody we can into this coalition. The best thing we have going for us in order to ensure that the legitimacy of the rejection of Donald Trump is beyond question is to win by a big enough margin that it's not even within cheating distance. That is what's before us. Not just to win, but to win big. Yes.
Unemployment rate for disability is 7%, which is almost twice the national average. In the wave of inclusion, how would you help the disabled community to get and maintain jobs?
Yes, it's so important. And the goal of my policy for workforce will be to double the rate of workforce participation by Americans with disabilities by the time we celebrate the next anniversary of the ADA in 2030. And in order to do that, we've got to really change a lot of things going on in our system today. First of all, end a sub-minimum wage that sends a message that we value the contributions of those with disabilities less. Secondly, the structure of Social Security disability benefits, SSDI, almost punishes a lot of Americans for working more. People who would be able to get a promotion if they had more hours hesitate to do it because having those hours puts you over that cliff, right? So we got to change the way that SSDI is structured. We got to raise the floor on the asset limit for Medicaid, another thing that discourages Americans with disabilities from contributing. In addition to the steps we got to take before you even get to the workforce to make sure that our schools are doing a better job of preparing Americans with disabilities, which means we must finally, actually, fully fund the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And I view this not just as a question of how we support those with disabilities, which is so important. And by the way, we're talking about the largest group of Americans covered by civil rights protections. And anybody who does not identify as part of the disability community, it's best to consider ourselves as temporarily able because so many Americans age into disability. So this is affecting all of us. And it's not just a specialty issue. But if we get this right, this also means unlocking the contributions of Americans with disabilities in the workforce, in our communities, as many have helped to shape my campaign and make it stronger. So thanks for giving voice to that. It's very important for us. One more? All right. I just got the high sign that we're down to one last question, so sir, you're up. Oh, better be good.
I believe that anti-Semitism is the worst it's been in my lifetime in this country and around the world. What would you do as president to reduce the anti-Semitism and also to stand up to the white supremacists?
Yes. Look, if you think about it, across the entire history of this country, of all the enemies that we've faced, every country, every terrorist group, everything that we've ever come up against, the force that has come closest to actually defeating America, the force in the Civil War that came nearest to ending the whole American project, was white supremacy. And I think we might live to see which side wins. The American dream, the American project, or these forces of white supremacy and white nationalism that are so closely connected to anti-Semitism. And seeing these forms of hate rear their ugly head right now, especially under this administration, shows us just how urgent it is that we act. Now, partly, that means making sure that we are acting on domestic terrorism and violent extremism. And, you know, this administration cut the resources for doing that. And we have a president who looks at Charlottesville and thinks there's very fine people on both sides. There's no way that White House is prepared to keep us safe. But it's not just a question of concrete, specific policies. I think it's also a question of the message that goes out from the highest office in the land, that we have to stamp out anti-Semitism. We have to stamp out hate, that everyone has a place in the United States. What doesn't have a place is this kind of hatred. And let's be honest with ourselves. A lot of folks were rightfully shocked by some of the rhetoric that's emerged in the Trump administration, but this isn't new with the Trump administration. A lot of things have been simmering beneath the surface that have been with us all along. The question is now going to be the time we actually confront them? I believe it can be. I believe it has to be. And our lifetime is when we're going to make that choice. And so I will be determined to use not just the policies, but the symbolic powers of the presidency to call this country to higher values and to name, call out, and reject anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred when they rear their ugly head. So hopefully you have a sense now of why it is I'm asking for your support. And the one thing I have left to ask of you is to bottle up whatever sense of hope brought you into this room and share it with anybody you know who's starting to give up on the process. There's a reason they call us candidates the hopefuls. It's because running is an act of hope, and so is being involved. And so please share that hope that brought you into this room with those you know who could make all the difference in this election. You can go today to vote at, what's the polling location? Well, everywhere, but the nearest one is Sinai Temple, I think, for this location. And of course, on Saturday. So can I look to you to spread that sense of hope to those you know? And are you ready for that sunrise we were talking about over Nevada where we put this presidency behind us? Well, I think you can help me become the next president of the United States, and I'll work every day to do right by you and make you proud. Thank you for being here.